close your eyes and let us journey back in time. Far away, across the hills and valleys of ancient Galilee, lies a small town. Its name is Nazareth, a quiet village, humble and hidden, resting among olive groves and stone terraces. In this place, more than 2,000 years ago, the boy who would grow to be known as Jesus of Nazareth spent his childhood. The world of first-century Nazareth was not grand or mighty. It was not Rome with its marble palaces, nor Jerusalem with its vast temple courts. It was a rural town of simple stone houses, dusty lanes, and hard-working families. And yet, in this simplicity, in this ordinary life, history itself was quietly being shaped. Tonight, we will walk slowly through Nazareth of the first century. We will see the homes where families cooked and prayed. We will smell the bread as it baked on clay ovens. We will hear the voices of shepherds returning from the hills and children laughing as they played in the dusty streets. And in these gentle details of daily life, we will find the world of young Jesus, the carpenter's son. Nazareth was not a large place in the first century. Historians believe it was home to perhaps 300 or 400 people. It lay in the region of Galilee, a fertile land in northern Israel, known for its vineyards, fig trees, and wheat fields. The town rested in a small basin, surrounded by rocky hills. Travelers passing by might not even notice it. It was the kind of village where everyone knew everyone. The houses of Nazareth were simple structures made of stone, mud, and plaster. Most had just one room, shared by the whole family. The roofs were flat, built of wooden beams covered with packed earth, where people sometimes slept on warm nights. Inside, there were few possessions, perhaps a low table, some clay jars for storing water and oil, woven mats for sleeping, and wooden tools for daily tasks. The streets were narrow and unpaved. Donkeys carried goods in and out, and chickens wandered freely. At dawn, the village would stir with life, women fetching water from the well, men heading to the fields, and children running ahead, barefoot and laughing. Though Nazareth was small, it was part of a much larger world. The Roman Empire stretched across the land, and Galilee was ruled by Herod Antipas, son of Herod the Great. Roman soldiers sometimes marched nearby, but rarely lingered in such humble villages. The empire was felt more in the taxes that families paid than in the sight of Roman power. For most people, daily life was a rhythm of work, prayer, and family. And into this rhythm, Jesus was born and raised. The heart of life in Nazareth was the family home. In the house of Joseph and Mary, Jesus would have grown up surrounded by familiar sounds: the grinding of grain into flour, the crackle of firewood, the lowing of animals kept in a small courtyard. Meals were simple but nourishing. Bread was the staple food, baked daily from barley or wheat. It was eaten with olives, cheese, figs, and sometimes lentil stew, flavored with herbs. Meat was rare, eaten mainly during festivals, but fish from the Sea of Galilee could find its way into village meals. Wine, diluted with water, was a common drink. Children learned early to help with chores. Girls helped their mothers with cooking, spinning wool, and fetching water. Boys often followed their fathers into the fields, learning farming and carpentry. In Joseph's home, Jesus likely learned to shape wood with careful hands, crafting tools, beams, and yokes. The sound of hammer against wood would have echoed daily in that little house. Family ties were strong. Relatives often lived nearby, and the extended family shared both burdens and celebrations. When the Sabbath came, work paused, and families gathered to rest. to eat together, and to pray. For young Jesus, childhood would have been filled with these simple, grounding routines. It was in such moments, quiet meals, shared work, Sabbath prayers, that character was formed. Nazareth was a working village. Most families depended on agriculture for survival. Fields of wheat and barley surrounded the town, and olive trees lined the hillsides. In the spring, women and children gathered wild herbs. In the harvest season, the whole village took part in reaping and threshing grain. Carpentry, Joseph's trade, was valuable in such a place. Wood was needed for plows, carts, yokes for oxen, and frames for homes. Though stone was the main building material, wood was essential for doors, beams, and furniture. A carpenter was not only a builder, but also a repairer of the village's everyday tools. Jesus, as a young boy, would have been expected to work alongside his father. He would have fetched wood, learned to measure and cut, and carried tools. The word often used to describe him, tekton, meant not only carpenter, but also craftsman, one skilled in building. His childhood was not a life of leisure, but of steady, humble labor. Women also worked tirelessly. They rose before dawn to grind grain, knead dough, and bake bread in clay ovens. They fetched water from the well, sometimes carrying heavy jars across long paths. They spun wool into thread, wove cloth, and mended garments. Their work was constant, yet it sustained the household. In such a setting, children learned responsibility early. By the time he was 10, Jesus likely carried his share of work as naturally as play. Nazareth was a Jewish village, and faith was woven into every part of daily life. Morning began with prayers, giving thanks to God. Meals were blessed with simple words of gratitude. The Sabbath, from Friday evening to Saturday evening, was the holiest time, marked by rest, worship, and family meals. The synagogue was the heart of religious life in Nazareth. Though smaller than the great temple in Jerusalem, it was a gathering place for reading the Torah, hearing teaching, and praying together. On the Sabbath, villagers would gather, men sitting at the front, women and children often behind a lattice or to the side. Scriptures were read aloud in Hebrew, then explained in Aramaic, the spoken language of the people. As a boy, Jesus would have been brought to the synagogue with Joseph. He would have learned to listen carefully, to memorize passages of Scripture, and to join in prayers. By the age of 12, like other boys, he would have been considered old enough to take responsibility for the commandments of the law. Festivals brought joy and color to the year. Passover, with its story of deliverance from Egypt, was celebrated with meals of lamb, bitter herbs, and unleavened bread. The Feast of Tabernacles filled the autumn with remembrance of Israel's time in the wilderness. Families sometimes traveled to Jerusalem for these festivals, though the journey was long. For those who stayed in Nazareth, the celebrations were still deeply meaningful. Religion was not a separate part of life. It was the very air people breathed. Every action, from working in the fields to baking bread, was touched with faith. And in this world of prayer and tradition, young Jesus grew. Life was not all work. Children of Nazareth found time to play, even in the dusty lanes of the village. They played games with stones and sticks, made little toys from clay, and raced barefoot across the fields. They sang songs, told stories, and watched animals with curious eyes. Jesus would have played alongside other children, his laughter ringing out in the narrow streets. He may have chased lambs on the hillside, climbed olive trees, or watched the caravans of traders pass by on the roads. Through play, children learned the skills they would later need: teamwork, endurance, quickness, and imagination. Education for children was simple but meaningful. Boys learned to read the scriptures, often starting with the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They practiced writing on wax tablets, memorized verses, and listened as elders explained the law. Girls, though not formally schooled in the same way, learned household skills, songs, and prayers from their mothers. In such an environment, the mind of young Jesus was shaped by play, by learning, by daily life woven with faith. Though Nazareth was small, it was not isolated. The town lay only a few miles from the great trade routes of Galilee. Caravans passed nearby, carrying spices from Arabia, silk from the East, and goods bound for the cities of the Mediterranean. Greek culture, Roman authority, and Jewish tradition all mingled in this land. Nearby, the city of Sepphoris, only a short walk from Nazareth, was being rebuilt during Jesus' youth. It was filled with Roman architecture, theaters, and markets. Some scholars suggest that Joseph, and perhaps even young Jesus, may have worked there as craftsmen, shaping wood for buildings. If so, Jesus would have glimpsed the contrast between the grandeur of Roman cities and the humble life of his own village. The political climate was tense. The Romans ruled with power, and Jewish resistance sometimes flared into violence. Tax collectors reminded villagers of Rome's reach. Yet in Nazareth, daily survival mattered more than politics. People rose each day to farm, to build, to cook, to raise children, to live. It was this ordinary, everyday world that shaped the boy of Nazareth.
Nazareth in the first century was no grand stage. It was a small village of stone houses, olive groves, and hard-working families. It was a place of faith and tradition, of meals shared in simple homes, of work done under the sun, of prayers whispered in the synagogue. Here, in the rhythm of ordinary life, Jesus grew from a child into a young man. He learned the patience of carpentry, the discipline of prayer, the strength of labor, and the warmth of family. He laughed with friends, worked beside his Father, and joined his community in worship. Though Nazareth was small, its story became great. For it was here, in this quiet village, that the one called Jesus was shaped by the humble, enduring life of his people. So tonight, as you drift into rest, remember Nazareth, its hills, its houses, its daily life. In the stillness of that little town, history was prepared for the world.